Now we have some kind of alternate things. In an emergency, you may want to think outside the box for some fuels, and that would include things like, well, motor oil. Now, used motor oil can be burned, and there's used oil stoves that you can buy. And if you're saving your oil, like I do, all of my oil, I change my own oil, and what I collect from the car, I store that in barrels and cans because in the future it'll have another use. I can also have my, in this case, used oils and canola oil. Don't even eat that stuff. That's bad stuff in there. But you can store that for use it for lighting or for other things. You have the active ingredient in these hand sanitizers. You take a look at it here, and well, it's ethyl alcohol. And this one, I think it's 62% in there. And if it's above 50%, it will burn. When we're talking about the proof of, you've heard alcohol, it's 180 proof, 160 proof, 190 proof in the drinking alcohol. Well, that's a way of proofing. And the way that you would proof in the old days, proof meant that it would burn. And what it meant to proof the alcohol was at 50%, it'll just barely burn. So you proof that you're at 50-50 on that. It's called 100 proof, but it was 50% water, 50% alcohol, and it would still burn. Okay, so this is 62%, or that would be, what is that, 124 proof is what that would be, and that will burn. If you're less than 50% alcohol, it's not going to burn. Another fuel, of course, you could use, and this would be for some small little things, but Vaseline, that's a petroleum distillant. Petroleum jelly is what that is right there. A cotton ball, it'll burn very nicely to help get a fire started. And then you have some other fuels like this, the heat in a can and these fuel tablets and those kinds of things that could be used. Trying to have large quantities of these things could be very, very expensive. Now, if you're going to start a fire, then it's in terms of, a small amount of fuel to get a big stuff going in here. And that's where you'd have some things like this that you want to be sure that you have in storage so that you can get your fire going. Now, matches. One of the very useful things to do with your vacuum baggers is to vacuum pack your matches, because over time they oxidize, they absorb a little bit of moisture. And if you have matches that have been just stored in an open box, after about 10 years, those matches get hard to light and some of them won't light. Now, if you'll put them in as I have them in here, I put them through the food saver. So they've been vacuum packed to get the moisture out of there, the oxygen out of there, and then they're stored in these cans like this. And I have these matches that are now, I don't know, 25 years old, and they still light just fine. So keep in mind, open matches will oxidize. They won't work as easily. Other kinds of things, of course, for starting fires would be having these lighters, these refillable ones right here. You won't have ways of starting a fire. And then you have to think about some alternate ways of starting fire. If you have batteries around, like a 9-volt battery and some steel wool, you just touch that on it and it just takes off like that, blow on it, and you can use that to start a fire. And then you get down to some things a little more primitive. This would be the steel wool or the cotton, or this is cotton lint out of a dryer. And then you have these strikers like this, these high-tech, these mish metal is what they are, and they put out a really hot spark. And of course, that'll land in this and it'll set it off immediately. And then we get a little more primitive, and you may want to learn how to do this, and that's using flint and steel and charred cloth, which you can produce yourself. So, trying to get a spark to take in tinder like this, that's pretty tough. But in charred cloth, which is nothing but a very pure carbon, this is going to be pure cotton cloth. Oh, and by the way, some of those, the reason why I bought a bunch of those T-shirts that we have down there in the store is because that's 100% cotton, and I can turn that into charred cloth as well as rags and other things. So I think we still have a whole bunch of those left. You want to buy those things because now I can make charred cloth to have a tinder that I can easily start a fire. And you could be in the business of supplying that to somebody and trading and I'll say selling, but you'll trade them for something else when they don't have a way to start a fire easily and they don't know how to make that stuff. Get those T-shirts because they are very useful for all kinds of things, including starting fires. When you make the charred cloth right here, and I can teach you sometime how you make charred cloth if you haven't done that. Then we have other things like road flares and some of these fire starting things that you can buy in kits like this, and that can be handy to have. You want to learn to do them, but you also may want to learn to get right down to the basics of using flint and steel and charred cloth because that is such an easy way to start a fire if you learn just a little bit about it. And because you're going to use all these things up eventually. You buy the flares, you buy these fire starters and things like once you've used them all, what the heck are you going to do? That's why you have these fallbacks of charred cloth, flint, and steel.